Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to our Garry Kasparov series. So in this series we're following Garry's life and his chess career, and we're back now in the year 1985, but with this match game that I wanted to show you today. It was a match game between Kasparov and Jan Timman. We're starting basically a new era in chess. In this particular moment of chess history, Garry Kasparov was of course the world champion in chess. So I have covered this match game, the last game between Karpov and Kasparov from the World Chess Championship in 1985, but I've covered the game 24 a year ago. So of course I added the game into our Garry Kasparov playlist. We're starting, as I said, a new era in chess, and now Kasparov faced the top grandmaster Jan Timman. Jan Timman had really a cool nickname back in the 80s. His nickname was the best in the West, so he was considered to be the best non-Soviet chess player in the world. He was very respected back in the 80s. He was really a great tactician, great theoretician also, but now he faced Garry Kasparov in a mini match. They played 6 games and Garry Kasparov outplayed Jan Timman with a clear result. Garry Kasparov finished the match game with 4 points against Jan Timman's 2 points. So I wanted to show you now a very instructive game played by Garry Kasparov against Timman in the Queen's Indian, Nimzo Indian, Bogo Indian ideas. I think this line still are popular even these days, so that's why we'll add it also into our d4 playlist. This game I think is very instructive how Garry played it. So here d4 played by Kasparov, knight to f6, c4. We have e6 preparing the Nimzo Indian if Garry would have played the move knight to c3, but Garry plays knight to f3, the anti-Nimzo or the counter Nimzo Indian setup. We are not allowing some pinning ideas of blacks. If we play knight to c3 too early, then we could get pinned. So that's why here Timman goes into the so-called Queen's Indian defense. This can transpose of course into some Bogo Indian ideas. Of course the main idea is still the battle for the e4 square in the Nimzo Indian, Bogo Indian, Queen's Indian. You can call it whatever you like because there are tiny little differences in these types of setups. Still we're battling here around the square e4, but we're delaying the move with the bishop. We're waiting white to play the move knight to c3, and when that happens of course then we want to play bishop to b4. So here bishop to g5, and it's a great idea I think also for white. We want of course to counter pin here, also never allow this knight to jump of course on e4. You see the whole game is now coordinated around the square e4. In the game bishop to b7, Timman delays also the situation a little bit on the king side, and now e3 fixing the pawn structure in the center, and now h6 because what we want to do now from black's perspective is use the pin, because after the move e3 the bishop can never retreat anymore to d2, so we're threatening here to mess up a little bit the pawn structure after bishop takes c3. Garry retreats to h4, Timman continues with g5 after bishop to g3. Now comes the idea knight to e4, and here Garry Kasparov plays a very aggressive line. There are of course lines like rook to c1. We can protect this. We can play queen to c2. We can also protect this. In one game also Garry Kasparov played the move queen to c2, but now he went into a more wild line. I think he played knight to d2, challenging the knight immediately. You have to do something here. Knight takes c3, bishop b takes c3, and after b takes c3 rook to c1. We're getting at least a tempo, and if you take out now the knight to d2, queen to d2 will happen, and I think white, although down a pawn, has a comfortable game because we could still break the position on the king side with h4 moves. We could also try some ideas to get a central pawn breakthrough with f3, e4, bishop to f2, and then with the support of these two bishops with this diagonals, we could simply create a space advantage in the center. So taking out is also not a good idea here. After the move rook to c1, Timman retreated with the move bishop to b4, and now Kasparov breaks the position on the king side anyway with the move h4. And here you have to take, I think, because if you here wait a little bit, if you allow your opponent here to take from black's perspective, effective if white takes g5. Then you have to play queen to g5, and still this h6 pawn is then a long-term weakness. Then I think something like bishop to f4 could happen. We could simply continue our pressure here against this weak isolated pawn on h6. So here that's why Timan took g takes h4. But you see again we have this weakness here on h6. After rook to h4, probably a better continuation is bishop to h4, because after bishop to e7 you could go queen to h5 and still continue our pressure. After rook to h4, something like even g4, g5 would be the possibility. Then maybe here simply use our attack on the h file. So here rook to h4, still nothing wrong here for white. White still has a good position. The evaluation is about equal, but the activity of white pieces is simply much better, although as I said, down a pawn. So here bishop to d6, Timan tries to get rid of this annoying bishop, who wants of course also after bishop to d6 take out the rook. So here Kasparov gets very actively into the game with the queen to g4. Now we're threatening also to play the move queen to g7. So here bishop takes g3, queen to g3, knight to c6, and now a great move by Kasparov, d5, because the problem is now you cannot actually take after e takes d5. The problem is now after c takes d5, if you try something like knight to e7, the problem is always this move queen to e5, simply attacking here the rook. Also the c7 is hanging. We could also get use here of some ideas. Knight to e4, then followed with knight to f6 is also a serious threat. So black is simply lost here. So after the move d5, Timan plays knight to e7 anyway, but now bishop to d3. Again, this idea e takes d5 doesn't work. So you see queen to e5 will happen and you simply lost. It's nothing that can be done here anymore. You simply lose the rook. So here after the move bishop to d3, Timan goes d6. What he wants to do is, of course, now to close the center with the move e5, and then play simply queen to d7 and queenside castling, getting out of this attack. In the game, Kasparov, of course, attacks the weak h8 rook here, and that's why rook to g8 had to be played, and Kasparov simply plays queen to h7. King to rook to f8 was played by Timan. If you try something like rook takes g2, maybe to take out this pawn, then we can play rook to f4. This is the main and serious threat now. You could try maybe knight to f5 to protect this, but now after bishop to f5, we have e takes f5, and now still queen to f5 or rook to f5, because this check doesn't bring you so much. You could maybe take out the rook, but you're vulnerable also to some attacks here, of course, on around the square f5, f7. So that's why you don't have time to play this move rook to g1. So in the game, after the move queen to h7, we said rook to f8 played by Timan, and now Garry Kasparov simply continues the attack, although probably a better idea is simply rook to h6, then followed with d takes e6, rook takes e6, then also some bishop to g6 idea followed with queen to g6 are possible if we take out this pawn. So black is simply worse here. So knight to e4, maybe not the best of moves, because here Timan found at least some kind of a counter-attack. Knight to f5. A better idea is simply to play after this move knight to f5 is to play knight to g8. You have to protect here your weak square f6. You have to protect it because it's a weakness. Still, of course, white is slightly better because we can attack also the position here on the queen side, but at least it would be some kind of a defense here for black. In the game, knight to f5 was played, as I said, a huge blunder by Timan, because Garry simply retreats, rook to h3, and now after queen to e7, you don't have actually time to calculate here, because g4 was played by Garry Kasparov, attacking the knight. Knight to h4, you see now the knight is simply trapped. Queen to g7, what Garry Kasparov is trying to do is play knight to f6, then cutting off here the connection between the queen and the knight would be simply trapped. So the knight is lost. Timan tries to castle. Even if you try something like f5 here, it's not a problem. We can take queen to e7, king to e7, and now knight to c3. Still, your knight is hanging, and if you retreat knight to g6, we can take out this pawn, and here also then afterwards this pawn, it's simply lost game here for Jan Timan again. So Queenside castling, again, black is trying to at least regroup, trying to secure the king, but now comes this idea, knight to f6. The good part also of this move is that you cannot get challenged anymore by the rook on g8. The knight is hanging in the game. Timan tried e takes d5, but now after c takes d5, we can notice that also the c file is opened. Here, king to b8, and now Garry Kasparov simply takes, and it's completely winning game here for white. So bishop to d5. Here g5 was played. Again, you can also take knight takes d5 is also a possibility, because it leads now into a very complicated game, but actually it's a completely winning game again for white, because you could take maybe out here the rook on h4, but then you get knight to c7, and if you try here a check, king to d2 is of course the possibility. You have to make a move with the queen, and now bishop to e2. If you take out, for instance, this pawn, then you're simply lost. Here knight to a6 is the possibility. If you go with your king here, then we can sneak in with the queen, and the main goal is now the move queen to d5. If you try, for instance, to compete on the c file, you get checkmated with queen to d5 or queen to e4, and you can only cover maybe with the rook, but again, you get checkmated. So it's a wild continuation, of course, that Garry Kasparov didn't see. Probably he didn't want to complicate things too much with the move knight takes d5, because he's up a piece. He tried now simply g5. Here bishop takes a2, but now after g takes h6, the game again is simply winning. We can simply push this pawn further. We have d5, h7, queen to a3, rook to d1 by Kasparov, regrouping, keeping his pieces good together. Maybe you can try some checks, but no perpetuals here for black are possible. We have rook to h8, and now knight to g8, locking here the rook. Very nice move by Garry Kasparov. We have bishop to b3, attacking the rook, rook to a1, attacking the queen, queen to c5, and now after rook, queen to h8, d4 was played. Here rook to d4, and it's after queen to c3 and king to e2. In this position, Jan Timan resigned. So you cannot actually take here, of course, this rook. You get a discovered check. A rook takes d8, we can take out the queen, and also you could get checkmated. If you try, for instance, something else, if you try here rook takes d4, actually the point is not to take here on d4. The better move is here discovered check with the move knight to e7, and then after king to b7, you get checkmated here on c8. So okay, I wanted to cover now one game played by Garry Kasparov as a world champion. He outplayed really the best in the West. He outplayed Jan Timan, but still Jan Timan will also have his great moments against Garry Kasparov in the continuation of our series. But as I said, Garry was simply slightly better. Back in the 80s, he was of course the world champion, and we're continuing now to follow the Garry Kasparov saga. I think we'll see now the best games really by Kasparov, because I think in this match game against Karpov, Garry Kasparov had to play pragmatic chess. You cannot just rush into attacks against such a great player like Karpov. But now we'll see also Garry Kasparov playing more freely, more actively, with some great tactical elements, with also some more risks, I think. So that's why it will be, I think, a great continuation of our very nice series. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Interesting lines of the Queen's Indian defense. If you want to see more games played by Garry Kasparov, check out my whole series so far, The Path to Glory by Garry Kasparov. Here's the link. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my series that I've covered also so far. Here's the link. You can check out now maybe the best chess games played in the past. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.